Side, okay. Okay, so thank you very much for that. So we're going to talk about nuclear weapons and what you can do. So I'm just going to start with an overview. And what I've found recently is that it's all about building relationships. And I think we can do this with the four-way test, but I want you to think differently. I'm going to look at the two extinction crises. I want you to think global and act local, which was an old adage back in my youth. We will talk about the Council on Resolutions and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We'll talk about social responsible investing and education, and then looking to the future in Rotary. So, as I said, I want you to please interrupt me and ask questions on anything that you're not sure of. So, when we look at the four-way test and the things that we think, say, or do, I'm asking you to look at it upside down. Helen, I think you'll know that this is from Dennis Wong's approach, and I fully agree with it, is that the first bottom three are all about building the relationship. And therefore, I think this is what is important. So when we look at, is it beneficial to all concerned? That's what builds empathy. Will it build goodwill and better friendship? That's about fellowship. And is it fair to all concerned? That is about respect. And then once you have built a relationship with another person, then you can look at, is it the truth? Because my truth may be different from your truth. And if we haven't built up that relationship, then we lock into conflict right away and we don't get anywhere. But I think once you've built a relationship and trust, then you can move on to acknowledge and define what the conflict is, the why and the what. You can identify who are the interested and affected parties, the who and the how, primary, secondary, and others. You can discuss and agree on what are the desired outcomes. And by having an open mind and curiosity for new ideas and novel approaches and different points of view, you then can solve the problem. As Senator George Marshall said about bringing peace to Northern Ireland, the most difficult obstacle to overcome was the lack of trust. And I think we certainly are seeing that now in the Ukraine.
Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct in 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster. And yet every year, governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late.
So what we are facing are two crises, the environmental crisis and nuclear weapons. When we look at the environment, it's a more slow process going to take over the next 10 to 30 years, whereas nuclear weapons could end our civilization as we know it anytime and over a course of hours. The environment on the one hand has certainly good public support. The youth are following Greta Thunberg and Fridays for the Future, but there is very little public support or discussion for getting rid of nuclear weapons. On the environment side, they're working on the fossil fuel prohibition treaty, which looks at three things. One is using up the reserves that we have, stop doing any further exploration, and transitioning to alternate sources of power. It is not international law yet. On the other hand, nuclear weapons, we have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was ratified after 50 states ratified it on January 21st, 2021. So just over a year ago. And we're now coming up to the meeting of the first state parties that is happening this month in Vienna. The environment, on the one hand, looks at the whole world. On nuclear weapons, we're looking at 9 countries with probably 30 umbrella states. But probably the biggest obstacle is what I call the MIPE complex, which is the military industrial complex. But I've added the political and the entertainment, because they all are contributing to having us have a military society, a culture that is run by the military. And what Rotary is always talking about, is it measurable and is it sustainable? And do we have a date? And I think this was the problem with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Article 6. They never set a date for getting rid of nuclear weapons. So we are suggesting 2030, we should get rid of nuclear weapons and also change our environment so that we're not having a crisis. So think globally, act locally. And I'll be coming back to this thought throughout my talk today. So Rotary International, together, but some more than others. There's inequalities, which is why we have the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We see a world where people unite, take action to create lasting change, and I would insert peace across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. And I would also add for the better, if we're just looking at change, because I think that when we're looking at change, we are making a change in the world, but is it for the better? And certainly we can look at the climate crisis for that. Here in Canada, we often used to say that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything. But now we are actually doing something, and we're making it worse. And we're now creating a climate crisis. So, and I think that just to change the season, going back to Christmas time, you all remember the Christmas Story, It's a Wonderful Life, where George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, tells how his town would be different if he hadn't lived there. And again, I just want to stress that you, all of you, are making a difference, and you can make it for the better. So I'll keep coming back again, as I said, to the globe, to the international, national communities, and ourselves. And then I would reverse this. As a medical doctor, I began treating patients. And then we realized that if a patient in a family was sick, that affected the whole family. So then we became family doctors and had family charts. And then we realized that health problems often originated in the community. And as a result, I became our mayor and now I'm thinking globally with Rotary International. So I want us to think also differently and move from national security, which is part of the military idea, to personal, which is my medical point of view, or human security and planetary security. And so when we look at what is out there, the climate crisis, the pandemics, racism, wealth inequalities, terrorism, radiation, nuclear weapons, these are all global problems. And they cannot be solved by the military. They must be solved by global cooperation. And again, if you looked at the astronauts, they look down on the earth, they don't see borders, they don't see nations, they just see our little blue planet, and that's called the overview effect. So I want you to think globally and think also from a personal human security instead of national security. Now we come to the Council on Resolutions, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I'd just like to say a few words about this treaty. I'm sure that you all know about it, but the treaty bans everything to do with nuclear weapons. So that's the production, giving of information, putting them on your soil, anything and everything to do with nuclear weapons, and including their delivery systems. It is also the first treaty that singled out women and children because of they're much more sensitive to radiation. It was also the first treaty that included the environment in a non-environmental treaty. And so it looks at rehabilitating the land that has been devastated by nuclear bombs. So when I was in 2017 at the UN, watching the deliberations and the formation, I was very impressed with how it came into being. And so to me, the TPNW is a revolutionary treaty. And now we're going to have the meeting of the first meeting of the state parties, and that's happening in Vienna right now, or will be this month in June. So I think that also when we first introduced this motion 2 years ago, we got 30% approval at the Council on Resolutions. Last year, we got 45% approval. And this year, now that Putin is threatening the use of nuclear weapons, now that this treaty is international law for the 60 countries that have ratified it, we're hoping that we will get well over the 50%. So, and I think what we were asking you to do is, one, get your own club and your district to endorse this treaty. And I've sent the condensed version, the improved version to Jim. And to also, of course, vote for it when it comes up for voting in October.
May
So that we
I
can
interject here?
certainly.
You're bringing up the idea of having a treaty that everyone can agree to. And being a little cynical, I look back and let's just take the treaty to get rid of landmines.
Correct.
The United States refuses to sign that treaty.
Correct.
Almost all of the major treaties that have been proposed to reduce warfare weapons have essentially been vetoed or refused to be supported by the United States. I'm very embarrassed by that. But as long as such a principal player is not going to do it, what can we expect?
I think we can expect a lot, Robert. And I think this is where the shaming and moral implications of a treaty comes into effect. Now, you talked about the landmines, which, of course, up in Canada, we call the Ottawa Treaty. because it was instrumental by people like Lloyd Axworthy and others here in Canada, and was actually signed up in Ottawa. And you're right, Robert, that other countries did not sign it, but because it became a recognized treaty in international law, companies stopped making, American companies stopped making landmines. So this is where these treaties have a very moral persuasion of affecting change in the world. And later in this talk, I'm going to talk about divestment. And that is again where you as individual Rotarians can play a big role. So I'll come back to this, but certainly even if a country doesn't go along with it legally or sign it, as you say, the implications still persuade companies and countries not to do it. So we have a test ban treaty, which was never ratified, and yet the states and the other countries other than Korea, which has not signed it, or also has not signed it, ratified it, are not testing. So these treaties do carry a lot of weight, Robert, even if they do not become ratified by a particular country. So I think, again, what we are asking is that I think Rotary, having 1.2 million people around, members around the world who are very influential, that this is why we need to have the Council on Resolutions pass this. Now, again, you're right, even in Rotary, this does not become law. It just tells the RI staff and people that this is what Rotarians are now wanting to happen. And I think it's the old adage of, you know, is it grassroots or is it leadership from the top down? And I think what we are working on is both. So we have had several conferences with Shekhar Mehta, present 3 over this past year. We've had him talk to the International Committee of the Red Cross. We've had the chairman of the UN on nuclear policy, Izumi, both on the same panel as Shekhar Mehta, and all pointing out that Rotary should become much more involved in speaking out on this. And again, this is not a, what I would say, a political, to me, actually everything is political, but it is nonpartisan and is humanitarian. And this is why Rotary should now get involved. It took some time for Rotary to get involved in the climate crisis. And now that's our 7th area of focus. And
Richard, could I ask a question?
Peace will also be the same. Certainly, Bill.
At this point, I'm wondering, again, like Bob, I wonder about these treaties that don't get signed and where is the momentum. And I'm thinking of Sharon Tennyson's. Does Rotary have to get outside of its membership and do something like Tennyson did with sister city programs to build more momentum across cultures and across the world?
Fully agree with you, Bill, that yes, we do definitely need to partner. And I think this is where, I mean, we've partnered with the, and I will speak to this a bit later, the Institute for Economics and Peace. We've partnered with Mediators Beyond Borders. We've partnered with the Peace Corps. We've partnered with a number of people, but we have played a very big role at the United Nations. And yet our Rotary representative network is silent in speaking out on this issue. And I think that we can partner with other organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross that has not 1, not 2, but 3 Nobel Prizes. It's equally respected, if not more so, than Rotary International at the UN, and has spoken out on against nuclear weapons and still maintained its impartiality. So this has been done, and I fully agree with you, Bill, that we need to partner with other organizations, the NGOs. And again, I was going to speak to this about the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. ICAN. What made...
How do you speak to people who argue that it's only nuclear weapons that has given us what they call the long peace, where there's been no catastrophic world war? One of our Rotarians, prestigious Dr. Robert Lawrence, is an authority on mutual assured destruction. And he's adamant that it's only the existence of the presence of nuclear weapons that have kept major powers from destroying one another in conventional warfare. So if we were to say, I understand limiting nuclear weapons as much as we can, reducing the number of them to reasonable numbers, but if we remove them all, how is this going to forestall the large nations imposing their will on small nations like Russia on Ukraine, or China on Taiwan, or such things as that?
Well, I think you've already answered your question, Bob, that Russia now is imposing its influence on the Ukraine with its nuclear weapons. I think again, as a doctor, it's much better to prevent a disease from happening than to treat the consequences of that disease. And I think, Bob, that and if there is a nuclear war, that is mutually assured destruction. But what we are looking for is mutually assured survival. And in answer to your question, I would say it's not that there's been the nuclear weapons that's kept the peace for over 70 years. It's been the United Nations and dialogue that has happened that allowed different nations to work out their differences in a peaceful manner. That is what has kept the peace. And I think we need to move from this culture of war, which is so prevalent and persuasive in the United States and in other countries, and to move to a culture of peace. And I think this is where we need to work with the United Nations. Certainly the United Nations needs a lot of reform, and it has just looked at a lot of reforms this past year. Various organizations have made suggestions on how to do that, and certainly that needs to be done, starting with the Security Council. But I would put it to you that it is dialogue that has kept the peace and not nuclear weapons. And again, my fear is that there is no treatment for nuclear war, as both Gorbachev and Reagan said, and as recently as Putin and Biden have said. Excuse me, a nuclear war can never be fought and it can never be won. So that is why we need to not reduce nuclear weapons. We must eliminate nuclear weapons, and we must eliminate them by at least by 2030 before they eliminate us. My father used to say, ban the bomb while you're last, or you'll end up in the blast. And I think that's where we're at now. And with the war now in the Ukraine, the risk of accidents, miscalculations, is never been greater. And the risk of escalation from tactical nuclear weapons to full-time nuclear weapons is also immense. And I can't see that Putin is going to go down losing face. And if he looks that way, he'll take the whole world with him.
May I, Richard?
Yes, I
I'm
can't see you, but go ahead, please.
From India. Quite a few things that you said. I just want to share my thoughts.
By all means.
One is DEI. It is inevitable because of the connectivity that we have and the movement of refugees, immigrants, travel, tourist trade. So it is going to be the future. We surely need to tolerate each other, if not be happy with each other, number one.
Correct.
Number two, it was also mentioned that we need to tie up with NGOs. Brahma Kumaris hold a position for peace in the UN, and Shekhar Mehta also signed something for their hospital in Abu, Rajasthan. Brahma Kumaris are present throughout the world, and they have a lot of peace initiatives. And in our district, we connected with them to work with quite a few areas in which they work, especially for the youth. And my humble suggestion is, you are talking about preventive strategies rather than remedial work as a doctor. I would even go one step further and say, let us do some developmental work in order to cultivate a culture of peace by working with the youth. The kind of programs that we have is youth exchange and things like that. However, I would dream that we should have, taking out of your slide, think global, act local. We should be able to connect schools across cultures to share common, because virtual meetings are so possible today. Supposing I were to talk about, let us say, use of home medicines in my culture, another country school can talk about what their family does in terms of home medicines or anything. Some new dress for a function or a New Year celebration, or whatever. The connectivity among the children in school and colleges could go a long way in establishing some kind of respect for each other's differences and a love for each other's similarities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I fully agree with you. And I will come to education at the end of my slides here. Just to move on, and again, I want to thank Jim very much for the Council on Legislation for voting for the word positive to be added in front of peace for 3 of our 5 avenues of service. Now, the Council on Legislation is law for Rotary, unlike the Council on Resolutions. And so things that do pass become automatic. So now your constitution of your Rotary Club has now been changed so that for community, international, and youth, the word positive is now inserted in peace. So what does this mean? Again, I think you're all familiar with the Institute for Economics and Peace and its 8 pillars of peace, which you see here. And of course, that's to look at countries on a global scale. And what the IEP does is it rates countries, over 160 of them, on a scale on how they function in terms of their government, equitable distribution of resources, and so on. But I would again put it to you that you can think of this on a community basis, on your own city, and even in your own Rotary Club, and even in your own family, your neighborhood. So do you have good relations with your neighbors? Is it the old adage of Robert Frost, do good fences make good neighbors? We talk about acceptance of the rights of others here. Again, in Rotary now, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. To me, that's what the acceptance of rights of others. So while this was initially to look at it on a national basis from comparing countries with each other, it can also apply to your own Rotary Club and to your own family. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about intercountry committees, or as ICC. I know you folks have already done friendship exchanges with other countries, and that's on a short-term basis. Intercountry committees, on the other hand, is for the long-term relationship. And it's an opportunity for Rotarians in both countries to get to know each other, to develop long-term working relationships, to assist each other with information with their respective countries, and to become ambassadors of peace. The ICCs actually began in 1950 when France formed one with Germany, two enemies. And I would say that to you that this is something that your club could get involved with in terms of the ICC between the United States and Russia. And while it's extremely difficult in a time of war, never before is the need greater than in a time of war. And so instead of withdrawing our ambassadors from each other's countries, we need to keep up that dialogue. We need to have that red phone so that our presidents can talk to each other. So communication is extremely important. And this is where I think, again, the intercountry committees can certainly play a role. And again, it's we're doing this also with our youth in our Rotaracts. They are also participating in intercountry committees. And we have them between India and Pakistan. We have them between Israel and Palestine. So it's, again, a way to build that culture of peace, which you just spoke of. So now we're looking at a municipal level. And again, what you can do. You can form a Rotary Cities of Peace. And again, I think you know both Rotary Dennis Wong, and Fred Armet, and they talk about our cities of peace. So to become a city of peace, what does that involve? It means sending in a letter of intent with multiple signatures, your Rotary Club members, to have a vision, a mission, and goals detailed statements for your community. So what is it that Denver needs to do to create a city of peace? Then you do events, you put up peace poles. In my own community, we have a Bridge of Nations with all over 100 flags flying on it of all the different ethnic groups and from the various countries. You could look at racism within your community. You could look at the police department. Can that create a city of peace? And then you take photos and backgrounds. You get also of the lead person in your club who is going to spearhead this. And then you send those off to either Dennis Wong or Fred Arment. In the world right now, there are 224 cities in 50 countries on 6 continents that are Rotary International Cities of Peace. ICANN, Cities Appeal, the TPNW. again, this is something that you and your club can do for your city. I just did this for my own city of Sudbury. Now, it took me about 1.5 years to do it. And then I mentioned it to another city down near us, Perry Sound, and they did it in 1.5 months. They were much better than I. So what this is to get your city to endorse the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and then to send that endorsement to your representative and to your senator. And again, this is the grassroots level of activity of bringing things up from the ground up. And I think, we've seen often, myself as a mayor, it is the city that is closest to the people. The municipal government is much closer to the people than your federal government. And so by doing this on a city level, you can make a difference. In the US, there are 72 cities, 4 states, 3 counties that are supporting it, and including Denver. So Denver is already part of the ICANN cities appeal. In my own country of Canada, we have 18 major cities. All the major cities are now have endorsed this. So this is something, again, that you can do, and I'm happy to know that Denver is already a member, has done this. Another program that your city, though, can do, and Denver has not done this, is Back from the Brink. And these are the 5 things that it asks your city to endorse to eliminate nuclear weapons, not to reduce, but to eliminate, to have a no first use, to end the sole unchecked authority of the president to launch a nuclear attack, to remove nuclear weapons from hair trigger alert, which then decreases the risk of accident and miscalculation, and to cancel modernizing nuclear arsenal. We already have more weapons to destroy each other 10 times over. We don't need to be modernizing them and wasting that money on them. So this is another thing that you and your Rotary Club can do. And then again, right now, there's 68 cities in the US that have done this, including counties and states like California, but Denver is not, so this is something that you could do. Finally, everything comes down to money. And this is another area that you can have an influence in divesting from the military and investing in the environment and peace. So I know Jim knows about this, but I'm not sure if all of you know that in June of 2021, the RI Foundation Board for a socially responsible investing policy. So what does this mean? It means that the Rotary International will refrain from investing in companies that harm the environment and, as they say, nuclear explosives, which is negative investing, and work for positive investing in companies that sustain their workforce and the environment. So, and you as leaders can also do this yourself. Now, again, looking globally, there's a program out there called Don't Bank on the Bomb with Susie Schneider, who is in the Netherlands and is with the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons and PAX, that looks at companies that are involved in making nuclear weapons. And there's only 25 companies that actually do this. And these are companies such as Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, excuse me, Raytheon, Honeywell. So these are companies that you can look in your own portfolio and make sure that you are not supporting them. it also means that there are banks and other institutions that put their money or could invest their money in it. And what we are working is to get those companies and banks to not put their money into it. And there's been some great successes. One of the largest pension funds in the world, the Norwegian fund, has done just that and is not investing in nuclear weapons. There's also, when we look at it, these companies, we've taken money out of investment each year. It's currently there's investors give about over $680 billion last year to these companies. This past year, though, that number has decreased by just over 60 billion. So we are slowly decreasing the amount of money that is going to these companies, and that is having an effect. Also, these companies make other things. Making nuclear weapons is just a small part of their business. And so they could be doing without making nuclear weapons. And the other point is that since the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is becoming, being endorsed by more and more countries, that means those companies cannot operate in those countries. So that is hurting their business. So we're slowly decreasing the amount of money that is available to them, and we are eliminating the number of companies that they can operate in as well. And so this is another, Robert, is another reason why we are having effect even without countries actually endorsing the treaty. It is having an effect on these companies. So go to, you can read the perilous profiteering. You can also Google divest ICAN.org. Now, something else that you can do personally, and again, this is what I'm looking at, is what you can do as Rotarians, is you can go to an organization called aswesow.org, and they have a weapons-free fund. So what they have done is they've looked at all the mutual funds in the United States, unfortunately not in Canada, pity, and they've looked at American mutual funds and they've rated them both in terms of the environment. You know, are they involved in fossil fuels? Are they involved in nuclear weapons? Are they involved in the usual sort of sin things of tobacco and taxes and pornography? And they've rated all these mutual funds accordingly. And so you can look at your own portfolio and make sure that you want to put your mouth where your money, or your money where your mouth is, and make sure that you're not investing in those types of companies. And again, as I said, you are having an effect. So there's 101 financial institutions have excluded nuclear weapon companies. $14 trillion worth of assets are currently being kept away. There are 59 Hall of Fame companies in the world for ICAN, and you are making a difference. Finally, as was mentioned, it's all about education. And we have Tom Sauer over in Belgium. He got a Rotary Global grant for 1,000 students to teach them about the dangers of nuclear weapons. So that's a global grant from Rotary to teach specifically about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Another organization, World Beyond War, and the Rotary Action Group for Peace did a pilot study with 100 international students in 10 different countries, teaching them about the futility of war. Peter Kyle, another Rotarian and RI director. He was head of the Rotary Representative Network at the UN. He has got raised $500,000, $500,000 to teach high school students along the eastern US seaboard about peace. Now, that's a general sort of topic, but they look at it in a number of areas. I'm also working with a young lady, Kasia Slavner, who's a Gen Z, meaning a 20-odd-year-old person, who is making a 90-minute documentary about the connection between the environment and the military. As you know, the military as a component of society is the greatest user of fossil fuels. It's also the greatest producer of greenhouse gases. In fact, the Pentagon produces more greenhouse gases than all of Sweden. It's also why the military was excluded from Kyoto. It was excluded from Paris, and it was excluded from discussion at COP26 because it plays such a large role in creating the climate crisis. And so this is again how everything is interconnected, and why we need to decrease and get away from our military culture and go to a culture of peace. And so with Kasia Slavner, I'm looking again to Rotary clubs like you to partner with Rotaract clubs, because she's in that age group, to get a global grant to make that connection between the environment and the military. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Finally, our other things that you can do is you can become a world citizen. Again, our colleague Arthur Kangas produced the movie The World Is My Country. He was also involved in the movie The Day After, which changed Reagan's thinking. You can be putting up peace poles, and I gather that you're already going to be doing that. You can become peace builder clubs and districts. You can contribute to the Rotary Disaster Relief, which I think you've already done. You can contribute to shelter boxes, and you could be looking at bringing in Ukrainians and other refugees into your country to help them out. And I believe you're also doing that. So kudos to you, and I want to compliment you and thank you for doing all of that. Finally, something new.
Could I add something to that, Richard, before you go on?
Sure, Tim. Or Bill.
I like that list. You know what's missing? There are a lot of academics, I am one, in Rotary, and there's nothing on there about writing, research, and books. I think Rotary is missing a major opportunity in not encouraging, supporting its members who are faculty to do original research and add that piece to the world conversation.
Fully agree with you. And that's where Tom Sawyer, he's an academic. He's a professor in Belgium, and he has done a lot of this, and that's why he was chosen to speak in Hamburg at the RI convention there. He is an academic, and he is doing that.
But I want to emphasize, though, that many clubs, Fort Collins is one, Denver, we have many academics, and if you put the challenge out to us, one way to contribute service is by writing and publishing. There is nothing in the Rotary material about that to encourage us academics that I can see.
Fully agree with you, Bill. And I think that's something that we need to do, and also to be looking to get global grants. And when you look at where Rotary actually spends its money, peace as an area of focus receives the least amount of funding. And so I think that could certainly change. And I think what you're talking about, Bill, definitely needs to be encouraged and to receive global grants to do so. The other thing which I think is new is to look at a Rotary Peace ecosystem. I've talked about the international campaign against nuclear weapons that brought over 160 civil society, non-government organizations together. They were then able to pressure 122 countries to come up with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I think this is the problem that we're seeing right now in the world, is that we are all disconnected. We're all in our own little silos, doing our own little thing, which is all very good. But I think if we came together as a group, and this is just a short list of Rotary groups that could come together and under the heading of a Rotary Peace ecosystem, and increase our communication amongst each other so that we can all work together. I think Rotary is looking at programs of scale, so that instead of small amounts, or well, you know, still a large amount, $50,000 here and there for or $100,000, are now talking into the millions of dollars of programs of scale for particular projects such as fighting malaria in Zambia. They choose one project each year, but I think that we need to be looking beyond Polio Plus and looking at creating a culture of peace, which will also take millions of dollars to change things around, and will become a huge program of scale to bring all these different groups together and then partner, as has also been mentioned, with other NGOs and other peace groups to all create a culture of peace against the military, industrial, political, entertainment complex. So thank you very much. So again, open it up for questions.
Thank you. Yeah, we're about out of time. There's I'd love to have maybe one or two quick questions. I guess my feeling on this whole thing, and Moroni and Timpson have some very excellent points. If I would like to see Rotary start getting behind the TPNW, largely just to start to create a groundswell and start bringing all of these issues forward. Bob, I doubt if very, very many of the people in our nation are aware that we have not signed on to these agreements. We have not signed on to the International Court of Justice or many of the international agreements we support. So I'm strongly behind the TPNW largely to start creating a groundswell and bring awareness to a lot of our society of what we as the leading nation are not doing.
I think the problem is that we're destroying our credibility with many of the nations in the world when we don't even say support the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Thank
The
you.
only other nation that has not signed that is Somalia. I mean, what kind of
Yep.
group are we participating in a situation like that?
Particularly now with all the gun issues, can we start a groundswell of activity and start bringing peace issues to the forefront?
And this is where I think, you know, Rotary is our leaders. Each one of you is a leader. And I think that by partnering and working with others, such as under a Rotary Peace ecosystem, that we can scale up, have a huge program of scale, and bring all these groups together like the ICANN and create that culture of peace.
Richard,
I
we thank you very, very much for bringing this to our awareness and sharing your knowledge and information. We are out of time. We'd like to move on. And thank you. I think that's very beneficial, and you have helped us again. Hopefully, let's begin the groundswell. I want to share with you next month, we have a phenomenal speaker once again by the name of Roz Duman. She is founded the Colorado Coalition for Genocide Awareness and Action in 2006, now the Coalition Against Global Genocide. She is she's previously worked with a lot of politicos locally, but her background in human rights is extensive. Ross has received multiple awards in recognition for her work, including the Community Action Award for the American Jewish Communities, the Colorado Division of Human Rights Award from the United Nations Association, the 2009 Civil Rights Award from the Regional Office of the Anti-Defamation League, and it goes on and on. You'll be receiving a detailed bio very shortly. Again, Richard, thank you very, very much. And we will see you all in a month.
Thank you, Jim, very much. And thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
We thank you.